Here we are at Landmark. We just won $10,000, and this week's Parsha is Parsha Vayishlach.
What does that have to do?
So, as you can see, groups are very powerful. We got together as a huge group, and we all contributed to winning this $10,000. So congratulations to all of us.
Pause for clapping. Anyway, speaking of groups, group theory!
Ezra, that's not the right kind of group.
Oh.
This is Torah, not abstract algebra.
Oh.
We're going to talk about one of the most famous groups in Tanakh, the 12 tribes.
In last week's Parsha, we heard all about the birth of the tribes, except for Binyamin. And in this week's Parsha, we hear about a few of their escapades, including the Rescue Dinah project by Shimon and Levi.
Near the end of this week's Parsha, we read of Reuven laying with Rachel's maidservant Bilhah after Rachel's death. Now, before you assume this is some sort of step-incestual relationship, Rashi clarifies that what he actually did was move Yaakov's bed from Bilhah's tent to his mother Leah's.
See, after Rachel died, it seems that Yaakov wanted to go to the closest thing to Rachel, which was her maidservant Bilhah. But Reuven felt that this was an insult to his mother Leah. He said, "If my mother's sister was a rival to my mother, should my mother's sister's handmaiden also be a rival to my mother?"
In other words, he did it out of respect for his mother. Despite this, he was still interfering with his father's personal affairs. So it seems that what he's done is certainly bad. And the narrative immediately shifts, and we don't get a clear explanation on whether or not he was right.
The Parsha moves immediately to the counting of Jacob's 12 sons. It's so immediate that the Passuk doesn't even end before moving on to the next topic. There's a gap in the Torah in the middle of the Passuk to indicate that we're moving on, but when we read it, it's part of the same Passuk.
The Reuven story is in the same Passuk as the beginning of the counting. There's a divide in the middle of a Passuk, a psuka be'emtza pasuk.
So that begs the obvious question. Why are these two events so conjoined? Why does Reuven's mistake have so much to do with the counting of Yaakov's sons, that they're part of the same Passuk?
So Rashi answers that question and more. He says, first of all, that the reason we're finally counting up all of the tribes here, when most of the tribes were born in last week's Parsha, was because Binyamin was only born here, and only now were they fit to be counted. Rashi says, Nishlama Hamita, the bed was complete. Rashi then says that counting the tribes, and including Reuven with them, shows that what Reuven did in moving the beds wasn't a sin.
Why do we keep talking about beds? It's making me tired.
Ezra, it's not just about the bed that Reuven moved.
No.
We think it represents much more than that.
See, when Rachel died, it seemed that Yaakov wanted to honor her. He wanted to keep her memory alive by lying with the person that, at one point, represented Rachel, because Bilhah had children on behalf of her.
When Reuven moved the bed to Leah's tent, it represented more than just protecting his mother. It represented shifting to the next phase of the Jewish people. It's like Reuven was sending a message. Rachel is gone. It's time to move on to our future.
That's also why we think that right after counting up the tribes, the Parsha moves on to the death of Yitzchak, representing the passing of the torch. Yitzchak is no longer the leader of the people. Now it's Yaakov and the tribes.
The lesson we take from this is that sometimes we have to move on. It's good to honor people you've lost, but we have to remember that change is inevitable, and sometimes can even lead to a better future.
One more lesson. As we said before, the Torah waited until Binyamin was born to count up the tribes. Only then were they fit to be counted. The group simply wasn't complete without all of the tribes. And all of the tribes were equal, says Rashi. So too, everyone in our lives plays an important role, and no important group can be complete without all of its members.
So next time you have a group assignment, be sure not to exclude anyone. And if you get a bad grade, grow from it and move on.
Thanks for watching.
Shabbat Shalom.